Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Packers Unscripted from Packers.com. I am Mike Spofford, joined, as always, by the one and only Weston Hodkiewicz. We're coming to you here from our studios at Lambeau Field. And, Wes, let's get right into it. The 2021 Green Bay Packers schedule is out. It is available. 17 games for the first time in league history, 18 weeks with the bye week thrown in. I'm just going to ask you flat out, when you first saw this schedule, what jumped out at you the most?
Where's the bye week?
All right.
I really, honest to God, struggled to find where the bye week was supposed to be.
Usually looking for it in October, maybe early November. No, December.
First week of December.
Yeah.
Honest to goodness, so we got the schedule put in front of me, and usually, and for the most part, it always is denoted where the bye week is, but I just was kind of beside myself. I didn't know the week 13 bye was a thing. I always thought it ended in week 12. You had to correct me on that. But lo and behold, that's what's happened. Now, the Green Bay Packers have been through gauntlets like this before. I do want to make that a point. Twice during my time on the beat, the last 9 years, they've had the week 4 bye, which has required them to then play 13 games to close the season out.
Yeah.
So they've been through stretches like this, but I've never seen anything quite like this where you have to play the month of September, October, and November before you finally get that rest. There's two ways to look at this. You can look at it like what Matt LaFleur did, which is you can't really worry about it. It's not something we stress about. You play the games that are on the schedule, and it is what it is. But for a team that does have playoff hopes and aspirations this year, they wouldn't have built this thing and kept the guys that they did if they didn't feel like they weren't close. I do wonder if you could stay healthy, if you could take care of yourself, that could be a really intriguing time to have a bye in that first week of December, because then suddenly you got 4 to end it, and then now you're looking at a potential playoff push. But you have to be able to get to that oasis, and there's a lot of miles they have to cover before they get there.
Yeah, exactly. And this ties into the part that jumped out at me, which is what I wrote about on our website, is you look at the stretch of games from week 5 to week 9. A 5-week stretch in which the Packers are playing 4 games on the road. You have back-to-back road games at Cincinnati, at Chicago. You come home for Washington. Then you have back-to-back road games at Arizona and at Kansas City, the 2-time defending AFC champions. That's a heck of a stretch from, the whole travel weary, getting road weary, jumping on airplanes, 4 out of 5 weekends and whatnot. I think that's going to be a really, really difficult stretch for the Packers to get through. But I'll say a couple of things about it. One, Matt LaFleur, as the head coach with the Packers the last 2 seasons, has navigated similar stretches before. Not quite like this, but his first year in 2019, the Packers had 4 road games in a span of 5 games. The bye week was also mixed in there, but it was, 4 road games out of 5. And, the Packers had their ups and downs through that stretch, but then they came out the other side. They got hot at the end of the season. They put it together, right? Last year, stretch of 4 road games in a span of 6. And the Packers actually lost all 3 of their regular season games during that stretch. They lost the 2 road games at Tampa, at Indianapolis on either end, lost the home game to Minnesota in between. So all 3 of the regular season losses occurred in that stretch, but then the Packers came out of it, had more frequent home games and made their run and their playoff push. So there is that kind of history, similar history, not exactly, but similar history that Matt LaFleur has navigated this team through. The other thing I will say is that in the midst of that stretch this coming season, the trip to Arizona, which is the 3rd of the 4 road games, is a Thursday night game. So at least you have now flying to the West Coast on a short week, not easy to do.
Right.
Really condenses your preparation and whatnot. But at least if you get through that Arizona game on a Thursday night, you get a weekend off. You get a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Players might even get Monday off. They're going to be in need of a break there. What a lot of the players refer to as the mini bye. So you're going to have that at least before the trip to Kansas City, which then ends this stretch of 4 road games in 5 weeks. So with that being said, you look at the entire schedule. You have this mini bye after the Thursday game after 8 games. You have the full bye week after 12 games. And then you have 5 games left in the regular season to finish out your 17, where you're hopefully in position to to make a playoff push. So when you look at it that way, it is, there will be that opportunity. There will be those two opportunities to get a little bit of a rest, but getting through that short week, Thursday night, West Coast trip to Arizona to get to that first little weekend off, I think that's going to be that's going to be kind of a crux point here for the Packers season.
And this is actually probably where I'm even more interested to hear your opinion on it than to give mine. Some people might not know this. The original title for Packers Unscripted was Mike Spofford's Packers Unscripted. This is your show, Mike.
Yeah.
But I am interested to hear what you think about this, because one of the big common questions that people had in inbox after this was, what do you think of the schedule? And I usually have pretty strong opinions either way. This time I really didn't. And the main reason for that is I don't really know what to make of it. People say, okay, well, you're going on the road to start the season 3 seasons in a row. You're closing on the road again. You have that thing in the middle of the season. You also have this deal where you only have 2 back-to-back home games, and one of them is separated by the bye.
Yeah.
So to me, on paper, I'm not a player. It seems like a fairly balanced schedule. But I'm curious what your take is on it.
Yeah, I mean, personally, when you look at it from the Packers' perspective, I think having more road games early and home games late is always going to be to your advantage because of the weather situation. Now, as it turns out, 2 of your December home games are against Chicago and Cleveland. They're not going to be any strangers to the cold weather, but Thanksgiving weekend, it's the Rams coming in, the same team that came in here in January, last January for the playoffs. They had some issues with the cold. You don't know how cold it's going to be on Thanksgiving weekend. But then week 17, second to last game and last home game of the regular season is Minnesota.
Yeah.
Your big division rival coming in on January 2nd, an indoor team. Those are the kind of matchups that can play to the Packers' favor. So in terms of starting the season on the road, the Packers playing 2 of their first 3 on the road this year, I say, hey, that just means you're getting more home games later. I think that works to Green Bay's advantage. So that's one way I look at it. The other. Go ahead.
I was just going to mention too, in the last 8 weeks of the season, I believe, there's only one trip out of the Midwest for Green Bay, and that's to Baltimore.
And which is not a long one.
Which
either.
isn't a long one.
That's a pretty quick flight.
Yeah, I'm used to the San Franciscos and the Denvers and the Seattles. So it's not a big ask there. So I do feel like, and again, it's on the Packers. It's incumbent on them to be able to survive that initial stretch, that definitely that middle portion of the season. But you can kind of see the peak and then the hill, and being able to go down it on the other side to really kind of speed up and ramp up going into that final stretch of the season if you're in title contention.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. As I mentioned, all these road games, week 5 through 9, you have all these road games. Nobody's season is necessarily going to be defined in the first half of the season, good or bad. But if you're the Packers and you can get through that stretch and you can be somewhere in the realm of contention, the schedule on the back end with all the home games, a mini bye, then a full bye in early December, that sets up to give you an opportunity to make a run. Quickly though, Wes, Sirius XM NFL Radio delivers hard-hitting analysis and up-to-the-minute NFL news that true football fanatics need 24/7, 365. The other thing I'll say about this schedule, and I know 17 games is obviously new, and last year we had the expanded playoffs, an extra playoff team in each conference. But that being said, 10 of the Packers' 17 games are against teams that were in the playoffs in 2020. I can't ever remember discussing a schedule where there were 10 games the following year against teams that made the playoffs the previous year. That's obviously, when you finish in first place, you have those 2 other first place, what I like to call the placeholder games. Mm-hmm. You're always going to have those. Those are going to be against playoff teams. Now with the 17th game being another cross-conference, you're going to be matched up with an AFC division, and you play the team that finished in first place. That's the Kansas City game for Green Bay. So that's going to be against another playoff team. And then, as it turned out, the last playoff team in the NFC last year was the Chicago Bears. They got the extra spot. So that's a playoff team that you're playing twice the following year. So that's sort of how things all added up. Well, and the fact that the NFC North is matched with the AFC North, and the AFC North had 3 playoff teams last year. The only team in the AFC North that did not make the playoffs was the Cincinnati Bengals. So the Ravens, the Browns, the Steelers, those are all playoff teams. And everybody in the NFC North is going to be playing all of those playoff teams from 2020. So from that standpoint, the schedule is really intriguing to me because it's very different to be looking at that many playoff teams from the previous year that are all lined up to play you.
And the Mike Spofford, let's be real moment of this episode, the Packers are also matched up against the NFC West. And being able to have the West in the NFC and the North in the AFC, that is kind of a perfect storm. Oh, and then, by the way, we're going to have a 17th game, and we're just going to pick some divisions out of our hat. Oh, and we're going to get the North versus the AFC West as well. Oh, and it's the Packers and Kansas City as the defending champions. Funny how that worked out.
Right.
And you're going to go to Kansas City. So be that as it may, listen, I was someone that really bit back hard against the 17th game. I wrote about it. We've talked about it.
Yeah.
I understand the business of sports. I understand why we're sitting here right now. I get it. It's going to take some time for me to get through all this. But what I will say, assuming we can figure some ways out to make these things safe for players or at least lessen the load on their bodies a little bit, things that the NFL and the NFLPA are going to have to discuss moving forward. The entertainment value of the game you cannot argue with. It's 18 weeks of football. That's attractive to networks. That's attractive to fans. They want to see these guys play. They want to see them as often as they can. And ultimately, if this is what allows the Green Bay Packers to play overseas at some point, maybe next year, it does seem like, the juice is worth the squeeze. But it's going to be a gauntlet, Mike. I'll be honest with you. When I looked at that same schedule after I figured out where the bye week was, and I noticed that it's January 9th for the regular season finale against Detroit.
I know that, yeah.
That hit me kind of hard.
I know.
That's a big adjustment.
Yeah.
But they want to keep everything, after Labor Day and all those things. Totally understand that. But it's going to be a grind, and it's going to be a big adjustment. I think a lot of players, coaches, and even people around the NFL are going to have to make.
That was the point I was going to make too, is seeing that January 9th is now the end of the regular season when, and these are the kinds of things that just make me feel old, Wes, but knowing that I believe, if I'm not mistaken, the famous Packers-Lions playoff game where Fritz Shermer's defense held Barry Sanders to -1 yard, that was a wild card game on New Year's Eve.
Isn't that crazy?
December 31st was a wild card game back in the early to mid 90s, and now here we are talking about the end of the regular season being on January 9th. So just goes to show that things don't always stay the same. And that being said, the NFL had a 16-game regular season schedule since 1978. And they had not changed it for over 40 years, and now we are going to 17 games. But I'm with you from the standpoint that it looks like the parameters they're putting in place and sort of the different machinations of this 17-game schedule moving forward is going to create the more opportunities for the international games, and particularly for teams like the Packers. The Packers have not played any international games. There are other teams that have hardly played any.
They played in Canada. They
That's
played in
right,
Canada.
yeah.
Sorry, that was preseason.
On an 80-yard field.
Who could forget about that?
We need
game?
to do a whole nother show about playing NFL football on an 80-yard
In 40 years,
field.
Mike, I'm writing an oral history on that game. How Trevor Davis ended up having a 23-yard touchdown, which really was only 13 yards, but they gave him credit for the other 10 because, that's just extra yardage,
All right, well,
I want to close on this. I just want to make one more point, if you don't mind me making it, in terms of how the schedule is going to lay out and where things are going to be. The NFL and NFLPA still have a lot to work out this offseason. They still have a lot to work out this summer. Brian Gutekunst has talked about this. I do like the fact that the Packers, by having the 9th game this year, the extra road game, they will also have only 3 preseason games. And as we found out, that's Houston, Buffalo, and the New York Jets. That last week now of August is kind of an open week for them. I have to imagine that, to use Matt LaFleur's terminology, that's going to be an above-the-shoulders week for a lot of veterans.
Yeah.
Being able to prepare for the start of the regular season and understand where their bodies are. I like that, Mike, because so often you've seen over the years, the guys necessarily that, I'm not saying they're a shoo-in for the roster, but you can't just play that last preseason game with just a bunch of guys who are about to get cut. You sometimes lose legitimate contributors on special teams or offense and defense in those games. I do like that it potentially removes that away from that challenge a little bit as you get ready for a regular season.
Yeah, and also with eliminating that fourth preseason game, which was always just a couple of days before final roster cuts, inevitably, you're playing a lot of young players in that game. Inevitably, you would have guys get hurt in that game, and it may not be a serious injury, but a guy turns an ankle or tweaks a hamstring or something like that, and then something that's not a major injury and you can't necessarily get a handle on it in the first couple of days ends up factoring into roster decisions and whatnot. Whereas now, the end of the preseason will be well in advance of the actual final roster cutdown. So in terms of the health of players and young players and their opportunity and whether they should be on the active roster or you want to try to bring them back to the practice squad, I think it's going to be a little bit more fair and equitable, not quite as random and chaotic a time in terms of figuring out those final decisions. I think that's something that in the long run, front offices, general managers are going to appreciate, because and certainly young players are going to appreciate, even though they're losing one opportunity to perform in the preseason and make that impression. The injury part of the equation maybe doesn't factor in as much.
It's an excellent point. And seeing, ultimately, here's the deal. You want to have the most competitive 53-man roster, the most competitive practice squad. You want your team to be at its healthiest point at the beginning of the season. And I like that that's where I think this thing is trending for the league. Because let's be honest, Mike, that first month of the year, that's a really exciting month of Packers football. They're going to go down to New Orleans. They're going to play a Saints team that's been one of the best here the last 15 years. They get a home opener against the Detroit Lions on Monday Night Football.
Under the lights.
They're going in a primetime matchup 6 days later to San Francisco. And then you get the Green Bay Packers and Pittsburgh Steelers at Lambeau Field. That's such an underrated matchup. Now, you're going to see that a little bit more because of this new rotation with that extra game. But that's something that only happens once every 8 years. So I love it. I love the way that side of it laid out. The Packers, with all this consternation right now, but what's going on this offseason, you can tell with the five primetime games, still a major brand for the National Football League. They want to be able to have those type of matchups. And, having another primetime game for the 29th year in a row or whatever it is against Chicago in December, that's the type of football you want to see. So my hat does go off to the schedule makers for making sure that happens.
Yeah, I think from the Packers' point of view, if you're looking at this and if there's something that is kind of annoying or to be upset about,
Christmas.
There is the Christmas. At least it's at home. At least it's not.
We might not be traveling though.
Yeah, well,
the game
who
from
knows?
home.
What I was going to say is that you have 2 West Coast road trips here at San Francisco and at Arizona, and the NFL scheduled both of those long trips on short weeks because the San Francisco is coming off of a Monday night game, and then as I mentioned before, the Arizona road trip is a Thursday night game, so that's an even shorter week. That's where I think the schedule makers kind of put the screws to the Packers a little bit with regard to that.
It is interesting though, because that did happen to Green Bay. Was that last year? I think it was last year where they ended up having the Thursday night game in San Francisco. Do I have that right?
Yeah. Last year was a Thursday in San Francisco.
I thought that was going to be a huge deal breaker for them. I thought that was going to be a real challenge. Now, certainly the 49ers had a lot of health issues.
Right.
But the Packers actually ended up playing really well, if I recall correctly, in that game. So you never do know, but you're right. That is a big challenge. Anytime you're going to the West Coast on 4 days notice, that's always going to be something you're going to have to really work through.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, September 12th will be the opener, and I'm sure it's going to be here before we know it. But yeah, it's the NFL has made this whole schedule release thing like a really big deal now. Like they leak out everybody's opener early in the day, and then you're waiting till later in the day to get all the news of the rest of the schedule. It's becoming this big day on the NFL calendar.
Yeah, there's not enough of them. They got to add in a couple more.
Right.
What were you doing on in the morning when at 7:00 or whatever, when it was announced that the Green Bay Packers were going to be playing the New Orleans Saints in the opener?
I was actually on the exercise bike in my basement.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and I see all of a sudden the messages start popping up on my phone. I was like, whoa, okay. I didn't know this was going to happen.
Back to work.
Didn't know this was going to happen quite so early. But yes, I was a little sweaty when I was finishing up that bit of work. But hey, We all roll with the punches.
We'll be ready for that next year when they evidently
Yeah, I
do
guess
that,
so. We'll be prepared now for the new timeline as to how
there
all
weren't
this
enough
works.
leaks. The NFL has to start leaking it themselves.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, we're gonna find they're gonna leak something at like 3 a.m, and we're gonna have to react and get it on the website, right? So
Because we got to do right by London.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, we're gonna find out our London game on London time. That's probably what's gonna happen next. All right, we've gone completely off the rails here.
Yeah.
We're gonna call it a wrap on this edition of Packers Unscripted. Be sure to follow all of our coverage of the team. All kinds of content with regard to the 2021 schedule is there for you on Packers.com. For Wes, I'm Mike. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We'll see you next time.